Welcome to the webinar of the week, put on by the Australian Water School, and it's called Zero Energy, What's the Hold Up? Well, indeed. Presented by Ashley Nichols at SA Water. I'm so glad that you've joined us, and there's plenty have joined us. My name's Trevor Pillar, National Partnerships Manager here at iSwarm. Just a quick rundown on the free webinars coming up in the future. You can see them all there. There's tons coming, and there's a lot more in the pipeline. And there's a couple of courses down there. We're doing water modelling in Sydney for a week in June. We'd love you to be along to that too. We'll go into that more detail later. But the agenda today is Ashley, 15 to 20 minutes from Ashley Nichols at SA Water, and then it's open to everybody. Q&A, make your comments, make your questions. Right, let's get into this now. Ashley Nichols is from SA Water. He's the Energy Portfolio Manager at SA Water and has had over 30 years experience in the electricity industry, worked in electricity markets since 1998. So here's a person with a great deal of experience about how to save energy, one that I'm personally very interested in, with solar panels all over my roof. But I won't go on with that. Right, today, we're so glad, Ashley, that you've had the time and taken the time to come and speak with us, and I'll hand right over to you now. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Trevor. I'll just add my welcome to everybody. It's good to see that there is a degree of interest in this. Just by way of background, I'm from an electricity background, working in a water utility. So what I'll sort of present to you first is what SA Water looks like from a water utility, from an electricity perspective. I think that will set a good context for thoughts and sort of strategies that we're following in SA Water. Now, the slide that you can see there describes the sort of size company we are in terms of energy consumption. We have a very variable energy consumption based primarily on weather and natural inflows into our catchments and reservoirs. We also consume a huge amount of energy through our pumping activities, which shift a lot of bulk water from our main water supply, which is the Murray River, into our reservoirs. Now, that probably doesn't make us very distinctive in terms of energy consuming companies. What does make us quite distinctive is how we currently interact with the electricity market here in Australia. What is quite unique about SA Water is we've been on an electricity journey over the last 4 years, which has gotten us to a point where we no longer have a retailer between ourselves and the market. We are fully exposed to the electricity spot price in Australia, which and in South Australia, which is a 30-minute spot price, which is essentially made up of 5-minute prices, which are averaged over 30 minutes. We're spot price exposed, so that Australian market can be very volatile with prices in each 5-minute interval, varying between potentially -$1,000 and $14,000. So that creates a huge spot price risk, which we currently manage through various mechanisms. We also export energy to the market at this point in time, and have sites that are connected at both the transmission, so high voltage level, and also at the low voltage sort of distribution level. Now, in terms of our connection with the market and the market operator, which is the Australian Energy Market Operator, or AEMO, we are a market customer. We're a small generation aggregator, and we're a trader. So quite comprehensive registration connection with the Australian electricity market. That's a bit of a summary of the current state. What I want to talk about now is what our thinking is about the future state. I think that starts with an understanding of what our energy risks are. The way we look at them in SA Water is we've got two risks, essentially a price risk and a volume risk. I'm going to concentrate on the price risk. The way we look at that is it's essentially a combination of three components, which is a capacity risk, an energy risk, and a network risk. And the capacity risk is really can be thought of as having essentially enough capacity either through your own generation or through financial products that you use to be able to manage the very left-hand side of these curves, which are a price duration curve, which I'll go into in a little bit more in detail. We also have what we call an energy risk, which is managing the high prices as they occur more and more frequently. So essentially having enough capacity, or having enough fuel for that capacity management to manage the energy price risk. And the third component, which in a lot of cases people don't take a lot of account of, is what we call the network risk. So the connection charges that that are part of our energy bill. I'll just expand a little bit on each of those. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with price duration curves, and this is a price duration curve for South Australia, and you can see down in this corner a representation of that price duration curve for a range of historical years. And in the upper right corner, you can see the average price for that price duration curve. Now, the important thing is obviously the points where electricity prices are extremely high. So this chart shows prices up to $6,000. If we just focus on 5% of the highest prices in the market, and particularly focus on the average price as we traverse along that 5%. If we are able to avoid the whole 5% of that upper price duration curve, we're essentially able to reduce our average energy costs by about $25 a megawatt hour. Now, for someone like SA Water, that equates to somewhere between, depending on the year, $7 to $9 million in energy cost reductions just by avoiding 5% of the time when energy prices are very high. Now, that's one risk that we're conscious of and needs to be incorporated into the management of our energy prices. The other one, which is the network risk, is somewhat different, and potentially contradictory to the energy price and capacity risks. In Australia, and in South Australia in particular, we have a range of different tariffs that apply to our network charges. Now this chart shows the tariffs that apply to a particular site, and they're separated into off-peak period, shoulder period, and a peak period, which only operates during certain months of the year. The peak period is very expensive. The shoulder period less so. The off-peak period for this particular tariff is essentially free. The cost of the network charge is based on your energy consumption in any 30 minutes of the year. And in fact, the peak energy consumption in each 30 minutes of the year inside each of those tariff bands. So we can see in this example, the cost of the network charges are due essentially to a very short duration of very narrow period where energy consumption is at its peak. Now, the obvious solution to that is to be able to reduce that energy consumption during that peak period. And that's essentially what we are trying to do in conjunction with managing our energy and capacity risks. But as I said, they're not always consistent, sometimes can be contradictory. Just to finish on the current state, with the existing assets that we have at our disposal, we demand manage, we generate our own energy. At times when electricity prices are high, we participate in financial markets, purchasing financial products that insulate us against electricity price risk. and we use a very modern risk policy framework which allows us to assess and trade off energy price risk against cost. That's essentially our current state and how we manage those energy price risks. What we found about 12 months ago was that our forecast energy cost was increased by about $15 million due to changes that were occurring in the market at the time. And that essentially became our burning platform, which led to a change in our thinking and a change in our strategy and objectives in the energy space, and gave rise to our zero net electricity cost target, which is a very ambitious target. It's essentially a top-down target. We determined that zero net electricity costs were our goal and have been working over the last 9 months on mechanisms and ways that we can achieve that. So the first question, obviously, is what does zero net electricity costs mean for us? And for us, it essentially means that we will, across the whole business, all 1,700 sites that are connected to the electricity market and the gas market, in a financial year from the 2020 to 2021 financial year, will have a zero net electricity cost across that whole portfolio. And that's inclusive of ancillary services charges, electricity charges, network charges, essentially all charges that make up our energy cost bill. So what's sometimes useful to know is what doesn't it mean? And what it doesn't mean to us is that we're not seeking to be energy neutral. We're not seeking to be 100% renewable energy supplied. We're not seeking to reduce our carbon footprint. We're not seeking to go off grid. All we're seeking is zero net electricity costs. Those other items of becoming greener, having a lower carbon footprint, are all byproducts of achieving that zero net electricity costs, and certainly valuable byproducts. But I think it's an important point that that is not what's driving our strategy. And how we're creating that value to get from our current energy costs, which are around the $50 to $70 million a year. Essentially, we're creating that value by planning to generate our own electricity behind the meter, by exporting excess energy, either at the time it's created or through storage of that energy into the electricity market at very high price times to maximize the value of that energy, and operating the new assets that we're planning to incorporate into our portfolio in such a way that they create extra revenue for us that will both reduce our network costs by reducing our footprint on the network, reduce those network charges as a result. I should also mention that the assets that we're putting in place won't mean that we are self-sufficient in energy. We still expect to consume about 30% of our energy from the market, just at very low times. Now, in order to develop our goal and develop how we would reach that goal, we'd set out an energy management framework, which has helped us map out how we will achieve that goal. So this is a very busy slide, and apologies for that. But essentially, if you think of our energy goal being supported by capacity, energy, and network components. So those are the components we're seeking to manage to reduce our costs to zero. We have the existing business as usual levers, such as demand scheduling, energy efficiency, energy storage, our own generation, and using the energy markets. They're things that we have in place now that haven't been sufficient and aren't sufficient to reduce our energy costs to zero. We have a whole range of solutions that are available to us in terms of increasing our capacity and our asset base that will support our capacity, energy and network risks and reduce the costs in those spaces. So what we've done as part of this framework is looked at a range of different technologies, a range of different assets that will help get us to that energy goal. Now, this framework's been useful for us because it's allowed us to see where certain technologies support multiple energy and network risks. So as a water utility, we are regularly contacted by large-scale pumped hydro developers who think that because we're a water utility and a large electricity user, that large-scale pumped hydro is an obvious fit to help us reduce our energy costs. What we say to those proponents of large-scale pumped hydro is that when we've mapped that against what our energy risks are, it essentially only fills one of the needs, which is a capacity in the area of capacity risk. So we have taken all of these potential solutions or assets, and in mapping those against those three sort of risk columns, have identified the ones that will be most effective at managing both the capacity, energy and network risks, and put that into a structure that shows us how much each of those sort of winning assets or solutions will contribute to each of those capacity, energy and network risks. So the big change for us is in being able to employ solar PV and storage. So the big change in our thinking was to understand how solar PV and storage will effectively manage our energy and network risks and also contribute to our capacity risks. And what mapping those technologies against those three risks has enabled us to do is to focus on 7 key initiatives. And those initiatives are presented here, essentially demand response, which is making our load more responsive to scheduling in relation to electricity prices and in relation to network charges, changing our thinking on biogas generation, where in the past we've sought essentially just to make a site energy neutral, as in produce as much energy as the site consumes. Our focus now is not so much on that, but more so on creating the most revenue from that biogas generation. The third component is to incorporate control and operation of our backup diesel generation into our energy portfolio. Previously, that had been part of our sort of resilience approach, but it can fulfill 2 functions from both an energy and a resilience function. So it's almost a free, it's almost free additional capacity for the energy portfolio, given that the assets exist and are used quite rarely. The fourth component is energy efficiency, and we're always seeking to improve our energy productivity. But the big changes in our thinking and the big changes in the asset base that we're seeking to create is the installation of solar PV and energy storage across approximately 70 of our largest energy consuming sites. The last component of those key initiatives is probably the most important one, and that is to be able to control the assets that we're planning to put in place, particularly the energy storage assets. And that's certainly a real challenge to be able to do that across 70 sites in our energy portfolio. So to summarize that, the key sort of outcomes of our program to install solar PV and storage is to put that behind the meter. That's the only way that we will be able to reduce network charges substantially. And put that behind the meter at as many of our large sites, as I said, up to 70, as make economic sense to do so. All of those sites will be import-export sites, so we'll have the ability to sell energy back into the market at the spot price when the spot price is very high to maximize the revenue from those sites. We'll also have the ability to use those new assets, in particular the storage assets, and to a lesser extent the diesel generation, to minimize our maximum demand on the network. So to essentially reduce the footprint that we have, or the footprint that the network sees from our energy consumption, which will reduce our network charges. And another key aspect is being able to incorporate existing generation into the design of the site alongside the new generation. An example of that is existing diesel generation. We also see value in the PV and storage that we're planning to put on sites in increasing the resilience of our critical sites to electricity supply interruptions, whether they be localized or more widespread. And of course, all of these new assets that we're anticipating putting in place will be fully integrated with our SCADA system to enable that control and optimization to occur. In order to, and you've heard me mention the word storage a number of times, I keep away from the term battery storage because we're not confident at this point in time that battery storage is the right solution for us or the whole solution for us. One of the paths that we are exploring as part of our strategy is to trial a number of technologies that we think may form part of our portfolios of assets in the future. And I'll just go through those quickly. The first of those is floating solar. Now there is quite a bit of floating solar already installed throughout the world. The units that we're testing are developed by Thiel and Thier. The advantages that we see for floating solar is obviously for a water utility, we have quite good access to water bodies. They are quick and simple to install. The permitting process is very straightforward in comparison to land-based or roof-based solar PV. Very low environmental impact in terms of the requirement to clear land or stay away from native vegetation, Aboriginal heritage, etc., etc. There is a potential for higher output from floating solar PV, but the reason that we're testing on our reservoir, or one of our reservoirs, is that we need to confirm that there is no adverse reactions in terms of algal growth and introducing new species of algae as a result of floating solar. So we are doing a trial of floating solar PV of 100 kilowatts, and that is due for commissioning early September 2018. The next one is a little bit more complex. It's a thermal energy storage unit that delivers both heat and energy. It holds that energy in a molten silicon. We are working with the developer of this technology, a company called 1414 Degrees here in Adelaide, to trial the first gas-fired, as in biogas-fired version of this thermal energy storage unit. Essentially, the advantages of it is that it can charge and discharge at the same time in terms of consume biogas to produce heat inside the thermal storage unit, and that heat can then be extracted and used in an externally fired gas turbine. It can produce heat and electricity independent of each other, so it works well with our strategy of producing electricity at times of very high price, which is not possible, or not as possible, with the reciprocating engine approach for consuming biogas. And our expectation is it will certainly be a much cleaner, environmentally cleaner process for consuming biogas, and will result in much lower operating costs in comparison to a reciprocating engine. Now that unit is currently the bottom right hand corner. You can see that's the unit that will be relocated from the Lonsdale test, or 1414's Lonsdale test facility, to our Glenelg wastewater treatment plant, and be operational by October this year. The last test that we are running, also due for commissioning mid-September 2018, is a Flywheel energy storage unit at our Hope Valley water treatment plant site. We're testing that, or a number of those units, mainly because they're an alternative to chemical storage that have no degradation, or claimed no degradation in their storage capacity over their lifespan, which is expected to be 30 years. Unlimited cycling, fully recyclable, and potentially offers some advantages over chemical storage. So that, as I said, that commissioning will start shortly. We are doing just one other test that does involve a advanced lead acid battery at one of our workshops. It's only a small 50 kilowatt hour unit in combination with 100 kilowatts of solar PV. And that trial facility is where we're testing our predictive optimization and control methodology. As I mentioned earlier, predictive optimization and control of the storage assets that we're planning in particular is a real key capability that we need to develop. It needs to be autonomous, it needs to be real time, and it is the only way that we will be able to create the most value out of those storage assets that we're planning to incorporate into our portfolio. We've done quite an extensive research across Australia and throughout the world to identify if there are any existing schemes that were available to use off the shelf, and unfortunately haven't found any. Whilst we've done that, or whilst that external research was being done, we put in place an internal working group, internal team, who were given the task of creating this tool for that 100 kilowatt and 50 kilowatt hour advanced lead acid storage trial facility. And that optimization and control methodology and tool is now being finished at a quite basic level, but is ready to be implemented. And essentially, it takes inputs from weather, current demand on the site, historic demand from that site, generation that will be occurring on that site from PV, generation that will be occurring on that site from other site-based generation, the capacity and capability of storage, inputs from the energy market in terms of what energy prices currently are, what they're forecast to be, and it takes into account network tariffs that apply on that site. And through an optimization process, works out what the best state of the energy storage should be on that site in each 5 minutes of the day, and constantly revisits that and provides instructions to the on-site storage to maximize the value of those energy assets. And by doing that, maximizes the reduction in cost at that site. Now, we're planning to, over the next couple of years, invest a significant amount of money and time in bringing in best-of-breed components, either from outside our organisation or from within our organisation, to improve that predictive optimisation methodology. I'll just skip that and just move on to the time frame. So that is our time frame. 0 electricity costs by the 1st of July 2020. The assets that we're putting in place are approximately 152 megawatts of solar generation, 35 megawatts of storage, all behind the meter, and all in place by that 1st of July deadline of 2020, and supported and controlled by that predictive optimization package, which, as I said, will be developed from where it is now consistently for the foreseeable future. And as I've already spoken about, the trial programs are all mentioned here in terms of their timeframes. So thank you for listening, and thank you for attending. I just want to leave you with one final thought. Essentially, from an electricity person's background, working in a water utility, I see water utilities being uniquely positioned to take advantage of the sorts of strategies that we're putting in place. Because the way I think of a water utility is essentially it's a whole heap of pipes joined by batteries. So I'll leave you with that thought and hand it back to Trevor.
Thank you very much, Ashley. That's an interesting closing thought. And we've got a ton of people on the line right now, and quite a few questions coming up. So, look, I don't know where to start with this, but maybe should we start with this first question here? But well, we're talking to Egypt, we're talking to India. Thanks, Abdel Azim, professor in University in Egypt, and Subhash in New Delhi. Where should we start? I think let's just go to one of these questions on the Q&A panel. There's somebody with their hand up there as well, so we'll get to that as well. Thank you, Nalari. I appreciate it, and Duck Van Vo. Thank you for the. I see that. We'll come to you guys. All right, let's go. Monica says, thanks, Ashley. He says water's moving in a great direction. That's true, Monica, quite true. Right, Mark Horden says, does the O&M cost for producing your own electricity get included in the zero net electricity cost target?
Yep, absolutely, it does.
All right, so that's an easy one. And can you outline, Mark Horden is from, I believe, Queensland Urban Utilities, process engineer there. Thanks, Mark, for your question. Secondly is, can you outline what or how a Flywheel energy storage will be deployed?
Yes, I can. Well, at this point in time, it's a trial, and the trial is designed to test whether the capabilities of the Flywheel energy storage offer particular advantages to us. So I mentioned what some of those might be. We have a range of sort of test parameters that we're looking for it to demonstrate, and primarily that is the responsiveness to signals, which plays into whether it can participate in all aspects of the electricity market here, not just energy, but ancillary services in particular, and potentially some of the more demand response initiatives that AEMO now starting to pay for. So it is a test facility, and if it demonstrates any particular advantages in any of those spaces, then it potentially could form part of our portfolio of assets.
Great, yep, thanks Ashley. Now we'll just go straight to Duck Vo in Queensland and hand over to you. Duck, let's have your question. That's really good. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. So, and also thanks Ashley for a very interesting presentation. My question regarding the predictive optimization and control that Ashley mentioned. I heard that Ashley also mentioned that they might currently have an internal team to develop that predictive optimization and control system. So my question is, because I'm a researcher, so is there any opportunity that I can work with that internal team to collaborate with them and work together to develop a better predictive optimization and control system for SA water, Ashley?
It's a possibility.
Yep.
We put that internal team together while we were doing the research on what was available elsewhere in the market, and
Yep.
the purpose of it was to learn while doing, essentially. So we knew that what we were trying to do was difficult. There wasn't, we didn't have a clear understanding of what we wanted to achieve, how we might achieve it. So it would be difficult to go out to external parties to specify what we wanted. But we didn't have the. We weren't 100% confident that we would be able to develop something that we could actually apply. But as it turned out, that internal team was able to do that. So that has given us a lot of confidence that we should continue on that path and bring in external expertise where that expertise is sort of best of breed. So if there is anybody out there who has some experience in any aspects of that diagram that I mentioned, and certainly we would be happy to talk to you and understand what you could add or how you could add value to that journey that we're on, for sure.
Thanks very much, Doug. I appreciate you coming today, and that's really good to have that question. Do we have Nallery on board? No, we don't. No. All right, lost Nallery. But let's go on to Mark Horden again. Says, do SA Water's biogas generators pay for themselves when considering energy costs versus maintenance and operation costs and cost of capital?
That's a very good question.
Maybe a short answer at this stage. We'll do another one of these webinars. I can see the interest is huge. There's a lot more questions coming up, so maybe a shorter answer at this stage.
It is a very good question. Is it a challenge? I guess that's the way I'll put it without giving you a yes or no. It's certainly a challenge. We have a fleet of 7 biogas-fired reciprocating engines, all Genbacker engines. We have a range of different models. I think the last set of 3 that we installed were all Generation 6 Genbacker engines, and their performance has been quite challenging for us in recent times. The quality of the fuel that we provide them has a significant impact on their reliability, which has obvious implications for operational costs and maintenance costs. Not just those, it also has an impact on the reliability has an impact on the ability for us to generate revenue from those engines. So they haven't performed as well as what we'd hoped, which has led to a rethink in terms of how we turn that biogas into revenue, and led to a test of a thermal energy storage system, which we think has the potential to offer us more value.
Yeah, that sounds great. Milit Shah, a consulting engineer, asks, how does the Tesla battery storage compare with the alternatives that SA Water are pursuing?
That's a good question, and we don't know yet.
Right, that's all right.
So until those trials are complete, I won't be able to make any comment on that.
That's great. Suvesh Chand is in New Delhi as principal scientist, and he says, is it true that green energy provokes more indirect damage to the environment by using more electricity energy-dependent appliances? It's an interesting question.
Can you just repeat that question, Trevor?
Is it true that green energy provokes more indirect damage to the environment? That is, by using more electricity energy-dependent appliances. I think that's actually getting a bit. Yeah, go on, you go.
No, I was just going to say, from SA Water's perspective, I would say not. Our energy consumption, in one sense, our energy consumption is not focused solely on energy efficiency. It's focused on energy cost, and that potentially means that under some circumstances we do run equipment less efficiently. So I think the question's a valid question. That energy, though, in South Australia is predominantly supplied by renewable sources, so the impact on the environment through a small increase in energy consumption is limited, and certainly most of our energy consumption is focused around lower energy cost periods in the market, which are dominated by renewable energy supply. And our strategy is to increase the amount of renewable energy that we consume.
There's this question from Subash in New Delhi, probably highlights a bit more of that, and that is all appliance or equipment need specific quantum of energy to perform their functions. Most of the time the energy applied is much more than required, so there's a direct wastage there. Pumping of water, for example, pumping of water, we may need 12 to 20 horsepower energy, but in practice we use 30. How can we minimise the wastage? Can you comment? But that's the situation they find themselves in India. Are you across that, the problem that he's outlining there?
I guess I can only just comment from my perspective in that what I've just talked about in terms of the efficiency of energy, the productivity of our energy consumption may be deteriorating because we're exposing ourselves to an electricity spot price, which is driving us away from a pure energy efficient operation to reduce our costs. But by adding these new assets, so solar PV and storage behind the meter and they will be added to our major pipelines in particular, that signal will be reversed, which is a good outcome, which means that we'll be consuming more energy that we produce ourselves and therefore consuming that energy more efficiently.
Yep, no, that's excellent. Thanks very much. And now John Radcliffe, a research fellow at CSIRO, is on screen. So thanks very much for joining us, John. Great to see you. And what would you like to comment?
Ashley, you mentioned earlier the possibility of using hydro, but it's not part of your mixture of initiatives. Now, Melbourne Water has hydro on several of its high reservoirs. It's got quite a lot of mini hydro in its piping systems, which I guess also relates to the water pressure distributed afterwards. Sydney Water's got a hydro at the primary effluent discharge from North Head, but you haven't picked up any enthusiasm for hydro. Do you want to comment on the capital cost versus the benefits of that? Because you obviously would have looked at it.
Yes, you're right. We have, and we have two existing mini hydro facilities that essentially operate in a similar way as what they do in Melbourne and Sydney and take excess energy that's otherwise wasted and turn it into electricity. My comment around hydro is more directed towards the large-scale pumped hydro systems that could be built. We have a number of reservoirs that there are proponents doing some feasibility studies on at the moment. My comment around the large-scale pumped hydros was that they don't contribute to our network cost risk reduction because they're located in front of the meter. So the energy that's produced from them has to flow into our sites and attracts a network charge. So in a capital cost comparison, the energy that we put behind the meter can attract far better revenue because it can eliminate network charges. And just to give you some context, in our total, and this year was around $70 million was our electricity charge. So by electricity, I mean electricity and network charges. Half of that was network charges. So one of our principal sort of points of focus is to reduce those network charges. Can only be done behind the meter. So it rules out large-scale pumped hydro. And just to add to that, John, we are, as part of this portfolio approach, we are looking at a number of other behind-the-meter pumped hydro systems using some innovative ways to bring together multiple water treatment plants to create sort of a notional pumped hydro system. You probably understand the way that might work without me having to explain it.
Thank you.
Yep, no, that's great. Thanks very much, John. Appreciate your question greatly. There's a few more here, and we've got about 10 minutes left, so let's get stuck into these. I don't know where to start, really. Mark Horden from Queensland Utilities, has said, thanks for answering questions. Appreciate the insightful response. We too are facing a challenge with cogen engines due to biogas quality. Also grappling with the question of whether cogen engines are worth the expense and effort. Very interested in the outcome of your trials, particularly the thermal energy storage and flywheels. So we'll just take that as a comment, but really appreciate your comments, Mark. All right, let's go on here. Chris Belanger in New Zealand has said, is there a risk when you're using your backup generator for something else than black starts? For instance, are there any mitigations to reduce this risk of using generators outside of their core purpose?
Yeah, it's a good question. What we are expecting with the combination of assets that we'll now have after we install storage on our critical sites is that will improve the amount of resilience that those sites have. So where we've got that improved resilience, it will release more of the capacity of those diesel generators to participate in sort of the energy supply and energy risk management component. So we're certainly conscious of their primary function, and we'll have and developing sort of measures and standards to apply to sites that use backup diesel generators for energy market purposes, so that we don't reduce that level of resilience. But it's a challenging question, and goes to the maintenance and operation of those diesel generators, arrangements that you might need to put in place in terms of replenishing fuel. So yeah, it's a complicated question.
Got three last questions, and that might be it for today. I think we're up to the 50 minute mark. So look, Bettina Bendel in Adelaide, Principal Geoscientist, has an interesting question. Hi Ashley, thanks for the webinar. I understand that most of your presentation relates to electricity costs associated with pumping from the Murray. However, what is SA Water's strategy with respect to remote communities not connected to main pipelines? Has consideration been given to low temperature multi-effect distillation desalination, using heat from geothermal energy to avoid the need for electricity generation?
From my perspective, it's a simple answer, and the answer is no. I'm just looking at or answering that from the electricity perspective. Our strategy is to focus on the very high energy consuming sites in order to have them the quickest and most significant impact on reducing our energy costs.
There's a visionary aspect to that question. There is, yeah. Getting water on site without having to pump it at all. Yeah. So thanks very much, Bettina. We really appreciate the question. Yeah, no, but that's fair enough. Prakash Rao has said, with spot market exposure, is it managed in-house, or do you have an external company that manages this for SA Water?
It's all managed in-house.
Yeah, more in-house. Well, I'm going to say this is our last question. It's an interesting one from Megan Hancock in Department of Energy and Water. Thanks, Ashley. In groundwater science, we increasingly need to comment, let's say this again, Megan's a hydrogeologist. In groundwater science, we increasingly need to comment on the consequences of decreasing groundwater levels, which includes the increased cost of pumping and deepening the wells. Is there a rule of thumb for dollars per metre decline? Or could you direct me towards some resources? And we can answer this offline if you want, or if you have any comments on it now, or any listeners that may have a feel for this.
All I can say is that outside my sphere of expertise or experience.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
But all certainly, right. I'm sure someone within SA Water would be able to help. So maybe we could take that offline.
Absolutely. Well, look, Ashley, thanks very much for this. We've come to a close now, and we're going to take the webinar to the ending. I just want to remind everybody that there's a feedback short survey, take less than a minute to complete. We'd love you to complete that, tick those boxes for us, and we'd get some shaping for our future webinars. And we'll send you a link for this recording to share with your colleagues. And I just remind you to look at those free webinars coming up, some great great issues there that we're going to be digging into, and of course the HECRAS water modelling course in Sydney. Keep in touch with us on Twitter at iSwarm. Keep up to date with iSwarm on that Twitter handle at the bottom there. We are so pleased you could join us, and it's been a terrific cross-section of people that has been with us. Thanks so much again. We look forward to next time you can join us. Bye for now.